All right, guys. Well, so as sort of promised this morning, if you watched it, we saw Joe Haynes come in relief for the Washington Senators and do an awful job. So I figured I would go ahead and look him up. Now, the first things first, you've heard me talk about this before. Let me add myself back into this here. I'm sorry. Let's see here. We're going to put this webcam on. This is sort of my own fault. My computer has, for some reason, decided to restart everything in OBS once again. And there I am small, and we'll make myself a little bit bigger here in a sec. So after this morning's game, I thought, it was probably best to go and take a look at that guy who came in for the Senators and who decided to walk the entire house just to sort of see what was going on, and I figured we would do that. You can see here, though, first of all, when you go to Baseball Reference from 1949, you have to type in Washington Nationals. So if you do this, 1949 Senators, it comes up with nothing, right? So, I mean, I love Baseball Reference, but guys, like, if you read 1949 newspapers, they're always called the Senators, not the Nationals. I don't know what counts as the official team name, because in 1949 there still wasn't such a thing as the official nickname, right? That's really a product of the 60s. So, get your head on straight, guys. I mean, this is ridiculous. Anyway, so you go down here, you find Joe Haynes, there he is, and you click over here and you see that he actually had a couple years left in him, 31 years old by then. Never a particularly dominant pitcher, had a good season of 47 for the White Sox back when he was still starting games. I guess he did start 10 for the Senators in 49, but with 96 innings pitched and considering what that bullpen looks like, he's not going to be starting a whole ton of them. And, I mean, again, other than 47, which was kind of a fluke year, and then the War years, he was never really that good. This is a good example of a guy who was really probably a AAA pitcher. Or what would they call it back then, like Class A or like a Pacific Coast League pitcher or something like that. Anyway, not so much interesting going on there. Joe Haynes, though, so there's a couple of different ways that we can look up stuff about him, and I'll go ahead and pull this one over. This is an electronic copy of the Nair James Guide to Pitchers. And so this is kind of like the first place to look if you're trying to figure out what was this guy throwing, right? He was throwing basically a fastball, change, and curve, and that's based on whatever description it was that Rob Nair looked at. He had an interview with Charlie Metro, who said that Haynes was a fireball-type fastball pitcher. In today's terms, his fastball probably would have been around 90. So those of you who like to argue about velocity, this guy today, if he was throwing that fast, probably wouldn't make the big leagues. And had a small curve. With that as well, I doubt he would make it either. I think you'd probably make a good case. He probably shouldn't have made the big leagues anyway. Did have a good changeup, and he threw it off, and he'd throw you one, and then he'd come back right back with another changeup, which you have to be careful with. So when we're imagining sort of what's happened here today to the Senators as they were trying to pitch against the Red Sox, I figure you look at this and say, yeah, he probably threw one changeup too many. And then those balls in the dirt, I guess you would call those curves. I don't know. I mean, if with the small curve, it doesn't really make that much sense. You go look at him, you go look at this page here, and I tell you, it becomes really interesting. So it's a little bit small here for you, so I'll make it bigger. There we go, 150. Pitcher Joe Haynes fell in love with the boss's daughter at the Washington Senators spring training camp in 1938. This didn't, however, prevent him from being traded 2 years later to the Chicago White Sox. So that's a great story. He was born and then did a bunch of stuff. He went to spring training in 1938 and met Thelma Griffith, who's the niece of Senators owner Clark Griffith. So it wasn't the boss's daughter. It was the boss's niece. She was the daughter of James Robertson and his wife Jane, whose sister was Clark Griffith's wife. So it wasn't the boss's daughter, but close enough. But still, family doesn't mean anything. He ended up with the White Sox starting at 41 and back to Washington for 49. And it doesn't say too much about this here. He started to have arm problems, which was his trouble. This is pretty interesting. Yeah, his throwing arm bothered him considerably, but he thinks he can get it into shape by spring training time, according to the New York Times. Would have been nice to look at some Chicago newspapers or even Cleveland at the time. But Cleveland, when he was traded to Cleveland, he was then traded right afterwards back to the Senators so that Mickey Vernon, an early win, would go back to the champion Cleveland Indians. The rumor is that Clark Griffith sent Calvin Griffith over to negotiate with Bill Veeck because he didn't want Joe to play with Bill Veeck because Griffith disapproved of Veeck. Anyway, so pretty interesting story. Bill Veeck, as you know, was kind of like the black sheep owner for his entire time in baseball. I mean, what a black sheep, right? This is a guy who wanted to make reasons for people to go to the park and who would do different events and stuff like that to try to get the fans to go out. The reason why the other owners didn't like him, to be very blunt with you, is because Bill Veeck would spend money on promotion and try to create a good product for his customers instead of just creating the same old stodgy product that we've always had and then demand that people like it because it's baseball and you're supposed to like it. So it's the national pastime. Anyway, there you go, though, with Haynes, and that's the reason why he went back. He had trouble with the pitching arm and actually had surgery for bursitis in his shoulder, which I think is the reason why he might not have been on the opening day roster. I can't remember anymore, right? I mean, the Senators have 1 million players, so it's kind of hard to tell. So anyway, there you have it. That's a little bit of a quick story about this guy, Joe Haynes, another very, very obscure player who almost certainly is not good enough to be a big league player by any stretch of the imagination. We can't look at his minor league stats. There aren't many of them, right? He played for Chattanooga and Jacksonville in 37, where he wasn't exactly dominant, I think, by anybody's standards, right? I mean, he was striking out quite a few, I suppose. The 38 season, I think, is the thing that really pushed him over the edge, 18-9, but it was in Class B over for Piedmont. I mean, I don't know. Or I'm sorry, in Charlotte in the Piedmont League. I mean, I look at this and I think, is this really where, the next big, amazing, major leaguers are coming from? I don't know. I mean, we can look at the Charlotte Hornets and see sort of what things were like. Do they have any other names that you really recognize? Well, Al Evans, we just saw. Bobby Estaldea is another name that's sort of familiar to me because I know about teams from this era, but he's another marginal major league player. And then Early Wynn, of course. Early Wynn was there probably getting rehab. So Wynn had been up with the Senators, Indians, and then was over with the White Sox later on. He was with Washington, I think, doing some sort of injury rehab or something like that. I mean, that's about it. I mean, you look at this and you think, I don't know, maybe or Jimmy Bloodworth we know as well. Maybe there's another good player somewhere here. I mean, who did the Cubs have in Portsmouth? Did they have some sort of star that, we're not aware of? I'm looking through this and I can tell you, not really, except Eddie Stanky, right? Stanky came up, but he had already been up. That's the thing. He'd already been up in the big leagues. He was just sort of serving his time back down there. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm sorry. It's 1938. So he was the beginning of his career. My apologies. But anyway, I mean, even with that, you have Eddie Stanky playing down there. But for the most part, you're looking at this in 38 or whatever, and you have a couple players who, are sort of big league quality, but I'm not seeing anything that really stands out to me as oh, man, this guy was in this league. This pitcher must have been simply awesome, And I mean, that's sort of the way it is. You also have to remember, so these days we have all sorts of stats by which we can measure, a guy's major league equivalencies and stuff. There are people who've actually studied it, which they didn't do so much back in those days, right? And instead of just sort of believing in, a bunch of pixie dust and stuff like that, we nowadays can actually use real logic and stats to come up with some sort of educated projection. Again, I don't really think that this guy these days would probably have been a big league pitcher. But it's still a good story. He goes to the spring training, falls in love with the niece of the owner and ends up marrying into the family, and they trade him anyway. So there you have it. I'll talk with you later. Bye.